everyone, and welcome to Best Podcast Ever, where three idiots you don't know talk about a hobby you've never heard of. Except, there's only two idiots, and we are in hell. Just straight up hell.
Yeah, straight up hell. And also, I just realized that the reason this worked so much better when I did this with Kevin is that it's picking us up over Bluetooth, not from the phone. So there you go. We are in my car, as you might have gathered.
By the Bluetooth comment.
Yeah. So after one episode on our heritage rig in my basement that had worked so well for 16 episodes and it worked like absolute duty, we're now back to just doing whatever the hell we can because of the excruciatingly long time it took to get that episode out. And we found ourselves in the car and we said, let's bang out another episode.
Let's make the most of being in the middle of gridlock while playing the celebrity sighting game and having no luck there. So Let's do the next most fun thing we're known to do.
And let's tie up my phone so that even if we did see a Chevy celebrity or something else of such level of regularity, we would not be able to film it anyway.
Well, I have my phone in my pocket, and truth be told, I'd prefer if I was cameraman during this particular episode.
Yeah.
You might have other things to be doing there, Mike.
Nah. Well, yeah, that's true. The celebrity sighting was perfect because I was sitting at a light when it happened. So here we are. It is Friday, 4:30 or so in the afternoon in New Jersey, which means that everyone who normally leaves work at 5 is on the road with Mike, who normally leaves work at 4.
And Brian, who normally leaves work at 6, who just kind of gave up.
Yeah. So here we are. What do we want to talk about?
I hear we're a slot car podcast. Every now and then we talk about those.
That's true, and since Kevin is not here
we might actually stay on topic.
We actually now have to keep ourselves on topic because we can't blame Kevin. It's been a long time, actually, since we did a Kevin-less episode, now that I think about it.
He's not going to be happy we managed to do an episode without him. He'd be like, how come you didn't, tell me so I could have been in Jersey City at this very specific time?
Yeah. Slot cars, they happen.
Slot cars, they happen, and tonight, as Brian checks the schedule, what is tonight? What will Brian be racing? NASCAR Thunderjets.
Oh.
So, let me go ahead and explain what a NASCAR Thunderjet is to the fine folks at home who have never dealt with probably Thunderjets in general.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, we touch on HO racing a lot, but I suspect since I don't personally know any of our followers that are not on the show, there's a 99% chance that none of them know anything about HO racing because they are not part of this small community in which your reputation is on the line every time you go on the track.
Yeah, and this is a particularly angering race we have here. So what a NASCAR Thunderjet, as far as the NJ hobby rules go, is a basic T-Jet, Thunderjet, made by Aurora in the 60s. It has a 15-ohm pancake armature, so a normal electric motor kind of looks like a can, and it spins around itself, and I'll put some sort of image up here.
And all the parts of the motor are contained within the motor. It doesn't use the chassis as any part of the motor.
Unless you're Tyco.
Well, unless you're Tyco, yeah. I guess it's somewhat universal to HO, but the extent to which the pancake setup makes the chassis part of the motor, which is, the opposite of how real-life race cars are built, in which the engine is part of the chassis. It's kind of ridiculous when you think about it.
But it worked, and it actually worked a lot better than the can motor cars of the time.
Yeah.
Because the center of gravity was so low. Because first, people who designed slot cars had to realize that you wanted your center of gravity low. That was the first physics lesson they had to learn.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting because it seems like the story of slot car design is almost as if the people who set out to design slot cars initially had never seen a car
I was about
before.
to say, we're just sitting around in cave banging rocks together.
They had never seen an actual car or driven an actual car before and thought, what makes an actual car easier to drive?
I mean, the first one was just a door buzzer with an axle attached to it.
Just like a car.
Aptly named the Aurora Vibrator, so there's a company that's glad it's not around anymore to have to deal with that every time they did a heritage video. Anyway, so we have the Aurora Thunderjet, and the way these works here is there's another company we've touched on before, called Road Race Replica, and they've created these sets of
Oh God, the wheels.
fancy rims,
Oh no.
and you need to use steel wheels. They look like the old wheels that NASCAR used back in this particular era,
Or that
60s,
they still use.
60s, 70s. I mean, not the
Not
modern
quite.
ones are very much not steel.
No, they are.
They are
actually,
steel?
Yeah, no, they're 15-inch steel wheels because rent-a-car.
Hooray!
But yeah, no, these were like the solid steel wheels that didn't even have holes cut out of them.
Pretty much.
Yeah, just pressed steel. Yeah.
So you're like, oh, okay, so you're making it more authentic. But wait, these rims hate you, they hate the world, they hate going on straight.
Well, they're press-on wheels, which is always a problem with
They're press-on wheels with elaborate fronts made to look like something, so there's no way to get them on straight because there's no flat surface.
Right, that is correct. Because normally, your best bet for dealing with press-on wheels is to use a wheel press to press them on. But you're correct. The face of the wheel is textured in such a way that it's almost impossible to get it on straight, even with a press.
So, what do you normally use to try and get these monsters on?
I can't. Well, you know what? I have built one car to this spec ever, and I put it in a drawer somewhere and ran far, far away, and then threw a grenade at the house that the drawer was in. But my recollection was that I had to resort to the hammer of justice.
Yes, that is actually where I was going with this. Is Brian uses the hammer of justice on a glass countertop because it's straight.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know what the hammer of justice is, let us get even further into this inception area here. The hammer of justice is a 4-ounce
It's a little
brass hammer.
Yeah.
The brass hammer used because it can't bend the steel axles because it's softer than the steel. And it's actually a watchmaker's hammer.
Right.
And pretty much it's the only hammer we recommend using on T-jets outside of a sledge when you're done with them.
Yeah, this would be a good place to use my
The destruction of the Shark 20.
The Shark 20, yes.
The Shark 20 slowly plotting its way on how to white out history and write that it was the ball bearing motor.
Yeah.
But yeah, you want to use these really, really fine watchmaker's tools in general when working on T-jets. So once you get over getting these rims on the car,
then you get to build the whole rest of the damn thing.
Yeah, you try and that's the worst part. Like, say you get like a decent power plant, and then you put the rims on and they're crooked. So you take the rims off, spend another $5, and then you put the rims on and they're crooked.
Yeah.
I think I'm running a Chevelle tonight, a MEV Chevelle that I did up with Mountain Dew stickers because I had them. Yeah, they're not NASCAR stickers, I can tell you that. I think they're from a car known as a midget racer.
Oh, yes.
Which I think Lifelike was the only one who ever. I did like commercial ones. All the other ones are made out of Lexan.
Yeah. My setup for this race, when I used to run it, and I will not be running it this evening, I had the monomotoring 55 Chevy, which was completely a different era than all the other cars that people run, but it was allowed. But it was just a relatively wide body that allowed you some
clearance on those
rims,
yeah.
Clearance on the rims.
Well, I mean, a lot of people run the I guess that's the Plymouth Daytona that Johnny Lighting made. Was it the Plymouth or Dodge?
Daytona,
it was a Dodge Daytona, not the Plymouth one.
Not
then
the
again,
Plymouth Superbird, yeah.
They look identical to me.
Yeah, the differences are negligible, and at Johnny Lightning modeling quality and HO scale, you're not going to really see much of a difference.
Yeah, but I mean, I always just call that one the big slippery banana.
Yeah.
That's all that is just a big old long thing with a giant spoiler in the back. And we've talked about this before. Wings on real cars help them handle.
Yes.
Wings on slot cars make them terrible.
Yeah, generally, especially when they're that high. Although I always hear people still try. I mean, I hear people I think they're joking and then they're not. Talking about I need to position the rear wing plane on my Tyco Chaparral just right. That is magical thinking, my friends. That is as valid as my old thing about the door being open.
doors open, dust was getting on the track, I was falling off, the fish was this big. Like, yeah.
The jet created this much thunder. Yeah.
500 thunders.
Yeah.
Thunder being a unit of measurement, because we call them T-Jets Thunderjet, but the official name from Aurora was the Thunderjet 500.
500, which sounded like a big number. It was probably the largest number Aurora could conceive of.
I think it was supposed to be because they were going 500 scale miles an hour.
You think that was it?
No, I know that's it, but here's the problem. They're not HO scale.
Right.
So they're not actually going... They're going 500 HO
divided
scale.
by 87. Yeah.
Miles an hour, but that's like saying right now we're going a million.
We're going a million HO miles scale
Yeah.
miles an hour.
We can also make up units of measurement.
Yeah, they were bigger than HO. They were not as much bigger than HO as every other HO car.
With the exception of Atlas Zingers, which
Right.
were actually HO scale.
Really?
Yeah, Atlas Zingers were HO scale, and then Nissan, of all people, partnered up with Tomy. I want to say about 10 years ago, and my dad has the set in the basement. I'll see if I can get a
actual
picture.
HO scale cars.
They did some very, very high-end, very, very high detail HO cars, except they had to have their own special track, and the bottom of the chassis, instead of using pickup shoes or braids, use these little round things that look like the internal brushes.
Oh, okay.
So I'm sure those, like, if you were to play with that toy, it would work exactly once, and then, replacement parts never were made again.
Right. And you would need like a surgical robot to work on it. So
People are always looking at the tweezers that we have at NJ Hobby, and they look fancy because my dad's name is engraved on them. But that's
signature model.
Well, it's not because they're particularly good tweezers. It's just because back in the day, my dad's brother, my uncle, used to work there, and he knew how to do like nice engraving because he used to work on watches. So there's a lot of like tools that are of quality that have like calligraphy engraved of my dad's name on them just because he needed to practice.
Yeah.
What's metal?
Tweezers.
And now the tweezers say this, and now the pliers say this, and now the scissors say this.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is tonight's race. The NASCAR HO. It's probably going to be time over.
It usually is, right?
Time over lap.
Usually 2-minute segments, as I recall.
Because as you know, NASCAR is a timed series.
NASCAR might be the only series that never has a timed race.
Yup.
Actually, in fact, because even their 2 road races a year, they will finish the lap count if it kills them.
Even if there's only 4 cars running.
Even if it takes 16,000 hours to run 90 laps around the Watkins Glen short course, which is less than 200 miles, they will do it.
There was a year, and I'm sure if Kevin was here, and let's do this moment now so that Kevin can scream at his computer, I knew all the information.
Shriek Kevin into the abyss.
Oh, there he is.
Oh, there he is.
There's beeping Kevin. There's a joke we haven't done in a while.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
The problem is there's nothing sticking out of your radar detector, so it's not an Indy.
That's true. That is true.
It was back in the day, and I want to say it was a summer where I was in college, so I wasn't doing anything that summer, and I tried to get into NASCAR. I really did try. I watched like 6 or 7 races.
Trying to get into NASCAR is almost like trying to get into BTE. Like, all you have to do is say that you're into NASCAR, and you're there, but you failed at this.
Well, no, it's not even that. I say try to get into NASCAR as in like try and like get excited and be at all interested in like I found myself falling asleep.
It's tough, and you know what? I followed NASCAR when I was, in the same era that's my reference point for all racing, even though I've continued to stick with every other kind of racing but NASCAR. But in the early 90s, I would venture that it was a little bit more interesting. The cars looked like cars. There were not so many of the 1.5 mile same track as Charlotte over and over again.
Well, I feel like back in the day, a lot of people who were into cars really only had NASCAR and Indy.
Yeah.
And that, like, my dad was into racing back then, and he does have a lot of vintage NASCAR stuff, and he does have a lot of vintage Indy stuff.
Yeah.
Vintage, okay, in this particular example, we're talking about the 80s.
Right.
You have to remember I was born in 89.
Right.
So, the 80s are prehistoric history for Brian.
Right. Well, that's my reference point as well. I'm not that much older, so.
But even then, after a while, he was like, "This is no longer about the cars. This is like a soap opera where every now and then a race breaks out."
Yeah, well, that was especially true of NASCAR. Actually, I mean, one of the reasons NASCAR wiped every other kind of racing out of the national consciousness in the United States was that it was exactly that. It was wrestling on wheels. So.
Wrestling on wheels, but they couldn't determine, like, this person has to win.
Right.
So.
Unless it was Dale Earnhardt Jr. and it was.
Well, I remember I was watching during the Jeff Gordon Reign Supreme era when I was a little kid, not when I tried to really get into it.
Yeah.
But I remember I had a Jeff Gordon Lifelike that I used to drive.
Okay.
And I liked it because it was neon orange.
Right.
Like, that's all I knew.
It's the same reason that my favorite F1 team when I was younger was Benetton, because they were, before the Schumacher era, they had, the livery on the cars was just like color block.
Yeah.
Because it was, it was an Italian fashion company and it was the 80s, so of course it was.
And, anytime I tried to watch NASCAR, I would either root for a Mountain Dew car if it existed at the time, because those don't seem to exist for very long.
No.
It seems like they show up, and which is weird, because you think that Mountain Dew would always constantly have
a presence in NASCAR.
Well, they have a presence in esports.
Right.
Like, Mountain Dew and Doritos are like the official sponsors of everything to do with video games, and I feel like there's a little bit of crossover.
Yeah.
Especially if you look at Kevin as an example.
Yes.
There's extreme crossover between NASCAR players and video game players.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Especially, NASCAR fans under the age of 50.
Yeah. NASCAR fans who aren't upset that Toyota is competing. Although, to get off the subject of slot cars for half a second, because clearly we've been doing a great job of staying out of the weeds this time.
You mentioned your Jeff Gordon Lifelike, so there you go.
Well, yeah, and I was going to also mention that my favorite NASCAR driver was Bobby Labonte, just because he had a green car.
Right.
I've never bought a battery for my car and requested a name brand in my life, but I know he had the Interstate battery car, and it was green and black, and it was cool.
Yeah, that was a good looking car. An earlier version of that car is actually in the window of NJ Hobby.
Yeah, except that was Dale
Jarrett.
Yeah, that was Dale Jarrett. That hanging sign that I've knocked over countless times, that's held up by, at this point, an entire spool of fishing line.
And a lot of high hopes.
Ugh. And I think there's even still a Super Tire, 25th year anniversary thing hanging in there from 2014.
Yeah, there is.
Just to show how often we go in and change the signs at NJ Hobby, and I say we, even though I clearly haven't worked at NJ Hobby for...
Yeah, as you make careful note of in every episode.
Well, yeah, because every now and then I do get people who are like, "Oh, Brian, can you help me with this?" I'm like, sort of. I kind of remember where that was 9 years ago. I mean...
Yeah. But yeah, TJ NASCAR is an interesting class because, as we said, it bears little resemblance to NASCAR. And just, except,
Well, it bears a lot of resemblance to modern NASCAR because all the cars are the same underneath the plastic shell we're screwing to them.
Even the plastic shells are largely the same. It's just the decals that are different.
No, I'm running an MEV. MEVs are kind of rare to see out on the field, just because it would require you to spend actual money on a car that didn't necessarily run great.
Right.
And before that, I ran, my dad had a Nash, a 59 Nash, that I would run. But, I'll always kind of toy around with the different options, especially tonight when you're allowed to run cut wheel wells. So, cut wheel wells, for people who, again, have never done HO racing, were very common back in the day because they literally sold something called the hop-up kit.
Right.
And the hop-up kit would have instructions in there to gouge the wheel wells. Not even like cut. I'm going to use the term gouge only because...
Well, yeah, because that's what you would do. You would just hack away.
Well, no, it would be like, here are some right angles.
Yeah.
Here's some right angles you need to cut stuff out in.
Yeah.
And
and this would give you more clearance so that you could put fatter tires or taller tires without
It
hitting
would
the body, basically.
it would also give you a reason to go out and buy more uncut cars.
Well, yes. I mean, that was the real reason.
So now when you're looking at old Thunderjets, you see a lot of bodies that would be, and I suppose that's the reason why they're as expensive as they are.
Yeah,
Because there's so many of them that are absolutely shredded to pieces.
Yeah.
So tonight I do have another alternative body. Some kid in the 70s, I'm sure, bought a lime green Aurora Charger, rare car, expensive car, and then proceeded to hack the living daylights out of the wheel wells
Right.
and paint it like Richard Petty.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
And he did a decent job for a kid. It's very clear he wasn't using like acrylic paints. Like I'm pretty sure it was nail polish.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a sad story of a $125 car that got absolutely wrecked by a kid, which I now drive around because it's a toy.
Right. Well, it wasn't a $125 car at the time.
No, I think it was $4.
Yeah. And I mean, if it was the 70s, he probably wished it was a Magntraction or some more advanced cars than
The Thunderjet did survive into the AFX era a little bit longer than people gave it credit for, with the Ford Mach 1 Mustang.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
And the Dodge Charger.
That's right.
The ice cream truck.
Yeah, because the Mach 1 and the Charger are 69 model year cars.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's true.
And they certainly didn't get access to the molds early.
No, they did not. So, yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, considering that in the high T-Jet era of the mid-60s, they were still making the That's an Indy of the T-Jet era was a 50s front-engine Indy car.
You could definitely tell what was done in the early days and then never done again, though, because like the Ford Falcon, Fairlane, and Galaxy continue to be very sought after and very rare. And there's 1,000 combinations because there's different, boot colors and interior colors and chair colors and driver colors and blah 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 blah.
Well, yeah, the cars with interiors in general.
Yeah, the original line really did have a ton of cars with interiors in it.
Yeah, because they would do the hardtop thing too, where like the roof would be made of the clear plastic that was the windows, and they would just color in the roof.
Which honestly made the roof survive a little bit better.
Yeah, because it was more rugged. The clear styrene, which is the opposite of anything you will ever hear about any other plastic model ever. The clear plastic is the toughest thing on the car. But
Aurora was weird like that. Sometimes their plastic would be so incredibly tough that you could literally wear down brass with them.
Yeah.
And whatever that gray plastic is that they made the chassis out of, and we've gone over this, wears down the gears.
Yeah, it does. It beats the hell out of the gears.
And I don't know what that stuff is other than fiberglass.
Yeah, but it's definitely not. I mean, it's...
Oh, no, it's not fiberglass at all. It's some sort of plastic, but it's a plastic that does not fuck around.
Yeah. I don't know. But it is nasty stuff. I mean, it will beat the hell out of anything it comes in contact with. And if you ever try to grind it down, if you have occasion to run a lowered body in a class...
Or a power.
That's true. That allows you to cut the chassis. I mean, forget it. It's impossible to cut this stuff.
I use a hot knife.
Yeah, that's about all you can do.
Yeah, I use a hot knife that's circa 1960-something.
Yeah.
And, the lights dim when I plug it in.
Jesus comes out and says, "Hey, Brian, what are you doing?"
No, that's only when I use my dad's soldering gun. Not his soldering pen. He has a industrial soldering gun.
I've attempted to use one of those. That doesn't end well in general. It's kind of hard to fathom that you would ever need to apply so much solder to something that you would want the largest tool possible. But apparently this is a thing that happens where you say, I don't care if things are soldered precisely, I just want solder in the general area.
Well, you gotta remember, I'm sure soldering guns were big when televisions had, vacuum tubes.
That's true. When you were dealing with big components, I guess it made sense.
But I definitely remember I was working on another type of slot car called a Riggin, which is part of the brass era, which is a weird microcosm of the HO and 132nd slot car world, where for a brief 2 to 3 year stint, instead of using magnets, which are black magic, they were using brass to weight the cars down. Yeah, and Lexan bodies on the top, or back then it would have been butyrate.
Right.
Another form of plastic that if you
Look at it,
flicked, it
funny,
would
it
shatter
shatters.
into a million pieces. But I was trying to do some work on a Riggin and a Cobramite.
That's right.
And my dad was like, Brian, why are you going to go to Home Depot and spend, $3 on a soldering pen?
They're a little more expensive than that, but not much.
When we already have a soldering gun downstairs. And I was like, soldering gun. So
Yeah.
I take the solder and the flux and the everything, and when I know solder, I'm thinking of computers, I'm thinking of components,
Right.
and then there's this, giant fuck off. It literally has a trigger.
Yeah, no, I have also attempted to use one of these on slot cars. You know what I attempted to use a soldering gun, because it was the only thing I could find handy, was one of the many times I attempted to build a lighted T-Jet that used LEDs instead of lights, and I've never actually done it successfully, ever.
I mean, did you succeed in putting a giant fucking hole in your working space? Because that's all I did.
Yeah, pretty much. I actually, you know what? That was how I melted a T-Jet chassis, was with the soldering gun.
I can't tell you how many times my parents have come home, and in my parents' house, back when I lived there, he said being driven there, there is this little, sub-room in the basement. And clearly it's designed that way because you have to walk through a doorway to get there.
Yeah.
And it's a room that's maybe 6 feet by 6 feet by 5.5 feet tall. And that's known as the shop. And in the shop there is Jigsaw. There's my 3D printer these days. Back in the day that clearly wasn't there. And 2 workbenches. And that's where all the magic happened. And the amount of time my parents came home and just smelled burning coming out of the shop. Whether it was plastic burning, wood burning, firecrackers, that room was just where things went to get destroyed.
Yeah, it's funny how being a kid who tries to make stuff means you're a kid who breaks everything in sight.
My older brother, the one who became an engineer, in fact he has a doctorate in engineering now, was known for taking things apart to see how they worked and just not being able to put them back together.
Yeah.
I think that's a common...
I did a lot of that.
Yeah.
In fact, a big day for me back then, and my equally awesome friends in middle school, was the days when you could put out bulk trash. Because we would just find, people's VCRs and stuff that they were, and just pick stuff up for that exact purpose. So...
pardon.
Good God.
Hey, man.
Hey,
you know what we had for lunch.
That's true, yes.
Just to show how often me and Mike hang out, we also had lunch today.
Yeah, that's true.
Because, again, we don't live on the same block, but he lives on the block I work on. So...
Strike that, reverse it.
Whatever. We're both very awake right now.
Yeah, well, it's Friday.
It's Friday. We've clearly given up, and we're just trying to talk about our hobby that Brian is going to go enjoy later. And by enjoy, I've been doing really good at getting fourth again. That is my favorite place to get, right just out of the money.
Yep.
Close enough that you can say, oh man, if only I had focused another 10 seconds,
Yep.
I could have been in the money. But no, I got fourth by X number of points. X is normally less than 3.
Yeah, this is exciting.
Yes, for those at home, we are currently dealing with...
Trying to get on the parkway.
Yeah.
Because circumstance forced my hand to take a slightly different way home than I usually do, and it's going really well.
I've lived a life without regret. I'm sure I'll be fine.
Yep.
And hey, if they hit us from behind, there's a ton of laundry there to
That's true.
cushion the blow.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's going to be generally what we're doing in the next area. You know what I think is going to happen too? I think you're going to hear this one before you hear the other one. I think we'll go light on the images on this one and we'll get it out.
Yeah.
And then we'll do the one in the basement on the Heritage rig.
Yeah.
We're calling it.
That probably makes sense.
So why don't we go ahead and call it here? That's 30 minutes, roughly 15 of them talking about slot cars.
Some of them might have been talking about slot cars. I'm so busy trying not to die in this traffic that I don't even remember what we talked about.
Good. Then it'll all be new to you when you listen to it later and you're one of our 50 views.
I'm looking forward to it. But while you're here, you haven't heard the announcement of what's of our new merch. But why don't you go check out the merch link in the description, and maybe you can see it before we tell you about it in the previous episode, which is now the next episode.
As a carousel of images just scroll by, which is going to probably end every episode now.
Yeah.
Right. Folks, thanks for joining us for the ride. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you next time.